In preparation for this video, I've been watching a lot of interviews with John Carpenter, and one thing that's very clear from these is that Carpenter doesn't like to analyze or intellectualize his own work, at least not openly. It's clear that he thinks a great deal about his stories, and there are deeper themes running under the surface of many of his films, but when asked any variation of "what is this film about?", his answers are always no-nonsense and straightforward. Just listen to this clip from the Fear on Film Roundtable interview.
It's more about a creature that can become you. And if they don't stop it, it can become the population of the world in about 2 weeks.
In the same program, his fellow legendary horror director, David Cronenberg, has no problem intellectualizing his own work.
The psychological reality behind it and the potential and the possibility of it all is what makes, is the kind of horror that I'm interested in.
But to be fair, Cronenberg is Canadian, like me, and up here we all think we're intellectuals. Carpenter, on the other hand, doesn't like to show his hand. And really, why does he need to? He's a filmmaker, not an essayist. Everything he wants to say is right up there on the screen. What good is attempting to break down and analyze his work? For example, in a YouTube video. What kind of a nerd would do that? Despite the potential futility of this task, I can't help attempting to analyze Carpenter's films in order to determine what makes them so special. Why do I, like so many fans and so many directors, for example Quentin Tarantino and Jeremy Saulnier, have such an affection for Carpenter's films, and why do we keep going back to them over and over? It could simply be that his films are very entertaining, but there has to be something more, something that sets Carpenter apart. In this video, I will attempt the suicidal mission of defining just that, by examining Carpenter's approach to filmmaking. Out of all the genre films Carpenter made, he was never, or at least very rarely, tempted into the trap of gratuitousness. His horror films never used gore for the sake of gore, and his action films never used action for the sake of action. His films included these things, of course, but only as a tool to tell the story. In Carpenter's films, storytelling is always the first priority. If an element doesn't communicate something about the story and where it's going, it probably isn't in the film. Michael Myers' motivation can be viewed as killing for the sake of killing, or killing because of an innate evil, but every time Myers kills someone in the original Halloween, it has a direct impact on the story. When Myers kills Annie, it communicates that while he takes his time stalking his prey, he will not allow any of the babysitters to escape the situation, and he only targets his victims while they're alone. This scene demonstrates how physically strong Myers is and how difficult he will be to deal with. The character of Linda is killed while she is on the phone with Laurie, which gives Laurie the first real clue that she and the other babysitters are being targeted. The killings are used to shock and frighten, but each also has a dramatic purpose that affects the rest of the story. Most Carpenter films tend to be based on simple ideas. You could say tagline ideas. A badass must rescue the president from New York, which is now a giant prison. A cop and a criminal are trapped in a police station by an army of gangsters and must work together to survive. A group of scientists in Antarctica are hunted by a creature that can imitate them perfectly. You can sum up what each of these films is about in one sentence, and yet they're all interesting. The full films are more complicated than taglines, but Carpenter's films tend to stay true to the simplicity of the story idea. There are twists, turns, and surprises in all of his films, but at no point is the audience confused about what the goal is or where the story is going. Snake needs to find the president in New York prison within 23 hours or he will die. At this point, he's using a tracking device to find the president, but when he finds the device, it isn't the president.
I'm the president.
He has no leads until Cabby informs him that the Duke has the president.
The Duke got him. Everybody knows the Duke's got him.
Although Snake's path changes, his ultimate goal is always simple, and that is engaging because it's never ambiguous what we, the audience, have to look forward to. We can't wait to see how Snake will reach or fail to reach his goals. In the case of The Thing, Blair states pretty early on what the scientists are dealing with.
You see, what we're talking about here is an organism that imitates other life forms, and it imitates them perfectly.
Determining who is or isn't the Thing becomes more and more complicated, but behind this there is always the thrust of a simple story idea. That is, one of the characters is the Thing, and we don't know who, and if it escapes, it will destroy humanity. While we may be confused about who has become the thing, we're never confused about what the story is, or what's at stake. The characters are often complex, the world they inhabit is often rich and detailed, and there are twists and turns along the way, but ultimately the story is simple, and that is engaging, at least in most Carpenter films. Carpenter's films usually have a distinct atmosphere that is palpable almost immediately. The world the characters inhabit is almost like a character in itself. Even if we don't understand everything about the world, we can feel its presence. Setting the tone is always a high priority in Carpenter's films. But how exactly does he achieve this? An important aspect of Carpenter's film atmosphere is the score, often composed by Carpenter himself. When you hear the score for Halloween or Big Trouble in Little China, you immediately get a sense of the movie's tone and can't wait for it to play out. Because Carpenter often composed the score, conceived of the story and wrote the script with his writing partner Deborah Hill, and directed, he was able to fuse all of these elements together seamlessly into one unified vision. Everything fits perfectly into the tone Carpenter has set from the beginning of the film. The atmosphere is also aided by perfectly balanced world building. In Carpenter's films, you typically get a sense that the world the characters inhabit is rich and fully fleshed out. Even though very little screen time is spent on these details, the story keeps moving and is never weighed down by lengthy exposition, but somehow a sense of the world is there, even if it isn't fully revealed. This is usually achieved through dialogue, which often hints at the character's relationship to the world around them, but rarely goes into too much unnecessary detail. In this way, Carpenter takes full advantage of the principle that less is more, and leaves the rest to our imagination. Carpenter's no-nonsense approach to his films tends to apply to his protagonists as well. Many of Carpenter's leading characters are blue-collar heroes, who rise to the occasion and attempt to overcome a symbol of corrupt authority, or in the case of Halloween and Prince of Darkness, the embodiment of pure evil. There's often a sense of working-class cynicism in many of Carpenter's films. Authority and the system, sometimes even society in general, can't be trusted, but the honest, hard-working hero will attempt to overcome it anyway. This makes Carpenter's films relatable to a wide audience. Carpenter admitted that They Live was his answer to the Reagan administration, and of course the film views the state from a very cynical, you could say paranoid, perspective. At the same time, They Live and Carpenter's other films never come off as preachy or like they're overtly pushing a political agenda. This can be credited to Carpenter's habit of not taking his films or himself too seriously. Despite all the themes running through Carpenter's films, I believe he still views them simply as entertainment. After Carpenter's first hit, Halloween, he could have been content to simply repeat himself over and over. Halloween basically created a new subgenre of horror film, the teen slasher, and Carpenter could have milked this until the cows came home. He could have directed every Halloween sequel personally, but instead he chose to seek out something new with each new film project. You could say Escape from LA was an exception to this rule, but in the 18 films Carpenter directed after Halloween, he rarely repeated himself. Carpenter was able to delve into a number of distinctly different genres throughout his career, a goal that may have been inspired by his filmmaking hero, Howard Hawks, a director who similarly delved into many genres. In fact, if Carpenter can be accused of repeating one premise, it's the premise that a number of characters are trapped in a situation and must overcome their differences to survive. This was likely inspired by the Hawks film Rio Bravo, which Carpenter has admitted in several interviews is one of his favorites. But Carpenter applied this premise to a number of distinctly different stories and genres, and somehow managed to make it fresh each time.
I made sunshine down, but I see only one, trying to think I'm over you.
Many of Carpenter's best films were created with a small budget, yet managed to make a huge impact. By using simple stories and getting to the heart of those stories, using only what is essential, Carpenter was able to create amazing films on budgets that might have completely halted other directors. Watching Carpenter's early films especially, it's clear that he did a lot with a little, and that is inspiring. It's like the punk factor in music, or the famous quote about the Velvet Underground. Only 30,000 copies of their first album sold, yet everyone who bought one of those 30,000 copies started a band. Carpenter films have made a similar impact, in part because his films make it seem like you can do it too. Of course, you can't do it like Carpenter. No one other than Carpenter can. But many of his films prove to aspiring filmmakers that you don't need a massive budget, expensive special effects, or known actors to make a truly great film, and you don't always need to give away final cut or creative control to a studio to get your film made. Perhaps this is why so many filmmakers credit Carpenter as an inspiration. These are the factors that I believe made Carpenter one of the most praised and influential directors of all time. But I'm sure some of you have other ideas on what makes John Carpenter so special. I would love to hear what those are, or why you disagree with my points in the comments below. Everyone has a different way of determining what makes a movie good or bad, but for me, one of the best ways to determine a film's quality is its rewatchability. Carpenter's films are consistently some of the most rewatchable I have ever encountered. His films may seem pretty basic, even cheesy at times, but damn it if they're not entertaining over and over again. This to me is proof of Carpenter's prowess as a filmmaker, and why I hope we continue to rewatch his films and foolishly attempt to analyze them for years to come. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please check out these other videos and be sure to like the vid and subscribe to the channel, or support the channel by donating to the channel Patreon, listed in the description below. Until next time.